The December wind cut through Boston like a knife, turning the evening air bitter with winter's early arrival. Snowflakes drifted lazily at first, then with growing urgency as the storm front moved in. Emma Hayes pulled her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders, feeling the cold seep through the worn fabric as she hurried toward the bus stop. At 34, Emma's life had become a careful balancing act between pride and necessity. Once a respected architect at a prestigious firm, she now worked odd jobs to make ends meet after being laid off 6 months ago when her company downsized. Her savings had dwindled to almost nothing, and the medical bills from her mother's cancer treatments had left her financially devastated. Tonight had been particularly difficult. 3 job interviews, 3 polite rejections. The manila folder clutched against her chest contained her resume, portfolio, and mounting disappointment. Her apartment lease was up at the end of the month, and the prospect of homelessness loomed like the dark clouds overhead. The bus stop on Maple Street stood empty when she arrived, the plastic shelter offering little protection from the swirling snow. Emma checked her watch, 7:43 p.m. The next bus wouldn't arrive for another 20 minutes. She exhaled slowly, watching her breath form ghostly clouds in the frigid air. "Just keep going," she whispered to herself, the mantra that had carried her through these past difficult months. Just keep going. She thought of her mother, now in remission but still weak, living with Emma's sister in Rhode Island. They didn't know how bad things had gotten. Emma had become skilled at maintaining appearances during their weekly video calls, always positioning her camera to hide the boxes packed in corners, always smiling through the fear. The snow fell harder now, the wind driving icy needles against her face. Emma's thin shoes were already soaked through, her toes numb with cold. She stamped her feet, trying to restore circulation, and tucked her hands under her arms. From down the street came the click of heels against wet pavement. A man approached, tall and broad-shouldered, his face partially obscured by the upturned collar of his olive-green jacket. He nodded briefly as he joined her under the shelter, keeping a respectful distance. "Nasty night," he said, his voice low and warm with a slight southern drawl. Emma nodded, too cold to engage in small talk with a stranger. She noticed his hands were bare, reddened from the cold. His boots were worn at the edges, and beneath his jacket she could see a flannel shirt and what looked like a work uniform. Construction, maybe, or maintenance. His face was weathered but kind, with crow's feet around eyes that had seen their share of hardship. For several minutes, they stood in silence as the snow accumulated around them. Emma couldn't stop shivering, her body betraying her attempt at dignity. She curled her fingers into fists inside her pockets, willing feeling back into them. The man glanced at her, then away, then back again. Without speaking, he shrugged off his jacket and held it out to her. "Oh no, I couldn't," Emma said quickly, surprised by the gesture. "Please," he said simply. "You need it more than I do." "But you'll freeze," she protested, even as her body yearned for the warmth. The man smiled, a gentle expression that softened his weathered features. "I've got a thick skin, grown up in Maine. This is practically t-shirt weather." When she hesitated again, he added more quietly, "Please, it would make me feel better knowing you're warm." Something in his voice, sincerity without pity, made her accept. As he draped the jacket over her shoulders, warmth enveloped her immediately. It smelled of sawdust and coffee and something indefinably comforting. "Thank you," she said, her voice catching slightly. "I'm Emma." "Robert," he replied with a nod, "but everyone calls me Rob." The jacket was too big for her, but its weight felt like a shield against more than just the cold. It had been so long since someone had shown her kindness without expectation. In a world where every interaction seemed to come with calculation, this simple act of humanity felt almost foreign. "The 45 should be here soon," Rob said, rubbing his now bare arms. He didn't complain about the cold, but Emma could see goosebumps rising on his skin. "Are you heading home from work?" she asked, finding herself curious about this stranger who would give his coat to someone he didn't know. "Sort of," he said. "Finished a construction job over on Beacon Street. Heading to my son's place now." "You have a son?" A smile touched his eyes. "Yeah, Michael. He's 17. Senior in high school. Lives with his mom, but I see him Tuesday nights and weekends." The pride in his voice was unmistakable. Emma found herself smiling in response, her first genuine smile of the day. "What about you?" he asked. Coming from work? Emma hesitated. The truth too raw to share with a stranger. Job interviews, she said finally, deciding that partial honesty was better than none. Rob nodded, understanding in his eyes. Tough market right now. It is, she agreed, grateful he didn't press for details. The headlights of the approaching bus cut through the swirling snow, illuminating the relief on both their faces. As it pulled to a stop with a pneumatic hiss, Emma began to remove the jacket. Keep it, Rob said, raising a hand to stop her. You can give it back another time. But how will I? He reached into his jeans pocket and pulled out a business card slightly bent at the corners. I do carpentry work on the side. That's my number. Emma took the card, tucked it carefully into her pocket. As they boarded the bus together, she felt a strange sense of connection to this man she had just met. They sat in different seats, Rob near the front, Emma toward the middle, but she was acutely aware of his presence, of the warmth of his jacket around her shoulders, of the small act of kindness that had momentarily broken through her isolation. As the bus lurched forward into the snowy night, Emma looked down at the manila folder in her lap, the rejection letters inside suddenly feeling less defining. Tomorrow she would try again. Tomorrow might be different. She glanced toward Rob, who was looking out the window, seemingly lost in thought. There was something about him, a quiet dignity, a kindness without fanfare, that stirred something inside her. Not hope, exactly, but perhaps its quieter cousin, possibility. Emma pulled the jacket tighter around herself and watched the snow-covered city slide by through the fogged-up window, feeling for the first time in months, not quite so alone. 3 days passed before Emma worked up the courage to call the number on Rob's card. She'd kept his jacket hanging by her door, occasionally running her fingers over the worn fabric, remembering the kindness of that snowy evening. When she finally dialed, she half expected the number to be disconnected or wrong. Life had trained her to expect disappointment, but Rob answered on the third ring, his warm voice instantly recognizable. I was wondering if you'd call, he said, after she introduced herself. Still have my jacket hostage? The teasing note in his voice made her smile despite herself. They arranged to meet at a coffee shop near the bus stop where they'd first met. Emma arrived early, the jacket carefully folded over her arm, unsure why her heart beat a little faster at the prospect of seeing him again. The coffee shop was small but warm, with mismatched furniture and a rich scent of freshly ground beans. Emma ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, a plain black coffee, and took a seat by the window where she could watch for Rob's arrival. He came through the door exactly on time, snow dusting his shoulders. He'd shaved since she last saw him, and without the collar of his jacket turned up, she could see his face more clearly, kind eyes, a strong jaw, features that suggested steadfastness rather than conventional handsomeness. You found the place, she said as he approached, immediately feeling foolish for stating the obvious. Hard to miss, he replied with an easy smile. Mind if I grab a coffee before we talk? When he returned to the table with a large black coffee and 2 muffins, Emma raised an eyebrow. The blueberry ones were buy one, get one free, he explained, sliding one toward her. Seemed ashamed to waste the offer. It was a small kindness, presented as practicality. Emma accepted the muffin with a quiet thank you, understanding that he'd somehow sensed her pride would not allow for charity. So, Rob said, settling into the chair across from her. How have the job interviews been going? Emma hesitated, then decided that honesty was the least she owed him after his kindness.
Not great. I'm an architect. Or I was.
Firm downsized 6 months ago, and I haven't been able to find anything in my field since. An architect? Interest sparked in his eyes. That explains the way you were studying the building across from the bus stop. I thought you were just trying to avoid looking at me. Emma laughed despite herself. Was I that obvious? Professional defamation, he said with a shrug. I do the same thing with woodwork. Can't walk into a room without checking out the cabinets. As they talked, Emma learned more about Rob's life. He'd worked construction for 15 years, but had always loved carpentry. After his divorce, 8 years ago, he'd started taking small woodworking jobs on the side, hoping to eventually open his own custom furniture business. It's slow going, he admitted, especially with child support and rent, but it's getting there. I have a small workshop in my garage now. There was no bitterness in his voice when he spoke of financial struggles or his divorce, just a matter-of-fact acceptance that impressed Emma. When he asked about her background, she found herself opening up more than she'd intended. She told him about growing up in a small town in Massachusetts, about her scholarship to architecture school, about the pride she'd felt designing her first building, and then, surprising herself, she told him about her mother's illness, the mounting medical bills, how quickly her carefully built life had unraveled. "I've been living on savings and part-time work as a barista," she admitted. "But the savings are almost gone, and my lease is up at the end of the month. I might have to move in with my sister in Rhode Island, but—" She trailed off. "But that feels like giving up," Rob finished for her, understanding in his eyes. Emma nodded, grateful she didn't have to explain. "My whole career is here. What's left of it anyway? If I leave Boston—" "You're not giving up," Rob said firmly. "I know we just met, but I can tell that much. You're figuring things out, that's all." Their conversation flowed easily after that, touching on favorite books, movies, places in Boston they both loved. Emma was surprised when she glanced at her watch and realized 2 hours had passed. "I should go," she said reluctantly, reaching for the jacket she'd draped over the back of her chair. "Thank you again for this." Rob waved away her thanks. "It was nothing." "It wasn't nothing," Emma insisted. "Not to me." Something passed between them then, a moment of understanding that went beyond words. Rob cleared his throat, looking slightly embarrassed. "I don't suppose you'd want to do this again sometime?" he asked, without the jacket as an excuse. Emma hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I'd like that." Over the next few weeks, they began meeting regularly. Coffee dates turned into walks along the Charles River, conversations about architecture and woodworking, quiet evenings in diners where they lingered over cheap meals and rich conversation. Emma met Michael, Rob's son, a lanky teenager with his father's kind eyes and an easy smile. She was surprised by how quickly she grew fond of him, how natural it felt to help him with his college application essays or discuss the merits of different architecture programs. Meanwhile, Emma's job search continued without success. Her savings dwindled further, and she began selling furniture piece by piece to make rent. The deadline to vacate her apartment loomed close. Rob offered to help her move, to store some of her things in his garage while she sorted out her next steps. His kindness both comforted and unsettled her. It had been so long since she'd allowed herself to rely on anyone else. One evening, as they walked through the public garden, snow falling gently around them, Rob tentatively reached for her hand. Emma found herself accepting his touch, their fingers intertwining as naturally as their lives had begun to. "I have something to show you," he said, leading her to a bench. From his pocket, he pulled out a small sketchbook. Inside were designs for furniture, beautiful, elegant pieces that showcased not just skill but artistry. "These are amazing," Emma said, genuinely impressed as she turned the pages. "Is this what you've been working on?" Rob nodded, a hint of vulnerability in his expression. "I've been saving to open my own shop. It's taking longer than I hoped. But you'll get there," Emma said with conviction. "These designs deserve to be built." She turned another page and stopped, surprised. There, sketched with care, was a design for a small architect's desk with ingenious storage solutions and elegant proportions. "I designed this one for you," Rob admitted quietly. "For when you get back on your feet," which you will, Emma. Emotion welled in her throat, making it difficult to speak. No one had believed in her so completely in a very long time. That night, walking home to her increasingly empty apartment, Emma felt both lighter and heavier. Lighter because something like hope had begun to take root inside her. Heavier because she knew she was falling in love with a man whose life was as financially precarious as her own. The practical part of her mind argued that this was the worst possible timing, that she needed to focus on rebuilding her career, not starting a relationship. But her heart, long neglected, had begun to beat with new purpose. The next morning, Emma received an unexpected email from Westbrook Designs, a firm she'd interviewed with months ago. They were impressed with her portfolio and wanted to meet again to discuss a potential position. It wasn't her dream job, but it was in her field, with a decent salary that would allow her to stay in Boston. As she prepared for the interview, Emma found herself thinking not just of what this opportunity meant for her career, but what it might mean for her growing relationship with Rob. For the first time in months, the future seemed to hold more promise than dread. She called Rob to share the news, her voice bubbling with an excitement she'd almost forgotten she could feel. His genuine joy for her made her heart swell. I knew things would turn around for you, he said warmly. You're too talented for them not to. What Emma didn't know as she ended the call and returned to preparing for her interview was that the universe had set in motion events that would test both her newfound hope and her fledgling relationship in ways she couldn't imagine. The connection between her and the kind carpenter with the weathered hands was about to reveal depths neither of them expected. The offices of Westbrook Designs occupied the 23rd floor of a sleek downtown high-rise, all glass and steel and breathtaking views of Boston Harbor. Emma arrived 15 minutes early for her interview, her portfolio under her arm and her heart in her throat. The receptionist led her to a conference room where 3 people waited. James Westbrook, the firm's founder, Sarah Miller, head of residential projects, and a woman Emma didn't recognize, elegant in a tailored charcoal suit, her back to the door as she gazed out at the harbor. Emma Hayes, James announced as they entered. This is our candidate. The unknown woman turned, and Emma felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Even in the expensive suit, with her hair styled professionally and makeup perfectly applied, Emma recognized her immediately. The woman from the bus stop, the one who had watched Rob give Emma his jacket. Jessica Carter, the woman said, extending her hand with a warm smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. CEO of Carter Development Group. Emma shook her hand automatically, confusion swirling through her mind. What was the CEO of one of Boston's largest development companies doing at her interview? The interview proceeded normally at first. James and Sarah asked about her experience, her design philosophy, her approach to sustainable architecture. Emma answered confidently, regaining her footing, but throughout she felt Jessica Carter's gaze on her, assessing, calculating. Finally, Jessica spoke. Tell me, Miss Hayes, what would you say is more important in architecture, technical skill or human connection? Emma considered the question carefully. They're inseparable, she answered. The most technically perfect building will fail if it doesn't connect with the people who use it, and the most emotionally resonant design will fail if it doesn't stand up. Jessica nodded, something like approval flickering across her face. After a few more questions, James and Sarah excused themselves, leaving Emma alone with Jessica. I need to be direct with you, Miss Hayes, Jessica said once the door closed. This interview was arranged at my request. Emma's confusion must have shown on her face, because Jessica continued. I saw you that night at the bus stop. I saw what that man did for you. Rob, Emma said quietly. Yes, Rob, Jessica agreed, her expression softening slightly. His kindness, it affected me, more than I expected. She moved to the window, looking out at the city below. I grew up in foster care, Miss Hayes. Not many people know that. I worked my way up from nothing, built this company from the ground up. Along the way, I learned to protect myself, to trust very few people. She turned back to Emma. But I never forgot what it was like to be cold, to be alone. Seeing that man, Rob, give you his jacket that night, it reminded me of something I'd lost. Emma listened, still uncertain where this was leading. I had you investigated, Jessica admitted. Your work is exceptional. Your references praise not just your skill but your integrity. And yet you've been unable to find work for 6 months. The market, Emma began, but Jessica waved her off. The market is difficult, yes, but it's more than that. Several firms you applied to have contracts with companies that compete with Carter Development. When they ran your name, they found you'd worked on the Riverside project, the one that beat us out for city approval 3 years ago. Understanding dawned on Emma. They didn't hire me because I worked for your competitor. Indirectly competed against me, Jessica corrected. Business is often that petty, I'm afraid. She returned to her seat across from Emma. I'm offering you a position, Miss Hayes. Not at Westbrook, though they would hire you in a heartbeat on my recommendation, but at Carter Development directly, as head of our new sustainable housing division. Emma stared at her, stunned. But what? Because your work deserves recognition, because talent shouldn't be wasted due to corporate politics, and because Jessica hesitated, then continued more quietly, because sometimes we need to be reminded of our humanity. The salary Jessica named was more than Emma had ever earned, the opportunity beyond anything she could have imagined. Still, suspicion nagged at her. This isn't about Rob, is it? She asked directly. Because if you're using me to get to him somehow. Jessica laughed, the sound surprisingly genuine. No, Miss Hayes, this is about recognizing talent, and yes, repaying a kindness, even if indirectly, though I admit, I am curious about a man who would give his jacket to a stranger on a freezing night. Emma studied Jessica's face, searching for deception but finding only sincerity beneath the polished exterior. I'll need time to think about it, she said finally. Of course, Jessica agreed. Take the weekend. Call me Monday. As Emma left the building, her mind reeled with possibilities. The job would solve her financial problems, allow her to stay in Boston, give her career the boost it desperately needed. Yet something held her back, a nagging feeling that accepting would somehow change things between her and Rob upset the delicate balance they'd established. She found herself walking toward Rob's workshop without conscious decision. He looked up in surprise when she entered, setting aside the chisel he'd been using. "Emma, I thought you had your interview today." "I did," she said, then hesitated. "Rob, do you believe in fate?" He wiped his hands on a cloth, considering her question seriously. "I believe in kindness," he said finally. "The rest tends to follow." Impulsively, Emma told him everything about Jessica, the job offer, the strange connection that had brought them all together. "That's incredible," Rob said when she finished. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know," Emma admitted. "Part of me feels like I'd be selling out somehow, take advantage of a coincidence." Rob moved closer, taking her hands in his. "Emma, you deserve this opportunity. Your talent deserves to be recognized." "But what about us?" she asked, the question that had been lurking beneath the surface finally emerging. "If I take this job, if I become successful again while you're still struggling to start your business, then I'll be proud of you," Rob said simply, "and I'll keep working toward my own goals. We'll figure it out together, if that's what you want." The certainty in his voice calmed the storm inside her. Emma realized that what had begun with a jacket, offered on a snowy night, had grown into something neither of them had expected, but both desperately needed: partnership, understanding, the promise of a shared future built on mutual respect. On Monday morning, Emma accepted Jessica's offer. 6 months later, she stood beside Rob at the grand opening of Hayes & Carpenter, a boutique firm specializing in sustainable architecture and custom woodworking, funded in part by a small business grant from the Carter Foundation. And in the corner of their showroom hung a framed, well-worn olive jacket, a reminder that sometimes the greatest journeys begin with the smallest acts of kindness.